On today's World Insight, getting up to speed on the state of China-U.S. relations and chances of a thaw in thorny ties, catching up with a former top U.S. diplomat to China and his wife, and a spike in confirmed coronavirus cases in South Korea, the hard lessons of reopening while managing infections. Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight on CGTN. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. No end in sight yet for the COVID-19 pandemic raging on across the globe. Johns Hopkins University so far tallied over 4 million confirmed cases worldwide, with over 291,000 deaths. The pandemic has already brought challenges to millions of lives worldwide and brought to its knees the economies of China and the United States. But instead of banding together to stem the viral spread, it has sent their already strained relations on a downward spiral, some suspect. Tensions come on the heel of a 2-year trade war between the world's two largest economies. What's the chance of the two nations working together amid the economic and geopolitical risks? We're going to talk to people in the know today. First, let's meet this very lovely couple who I got to know a few years ago when they were working and living in China. Former U.S. Ambassador to China Max Baucus and his wife Melody Haynes from their beautiful home in Belgrade, Montana, inside the United States. Good morning, I should say, to you, Mel and Max. How are you?
Thank you. Good morning.
Good.
Very, very good. Thank you.
大家好.
Thank you for speaking Chinese also. You've been practicing it, Mel?
No.
Not much,
We don't
it?
have a lot of Chinese speakers here.
Not much. And
No,
also we
more.
have been having difficulties traveling.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. No, we go to China. I go to China 4 or 5 times a year, but with the COVID-19, of course, that stopped. Looking forward to opening up so we can come back.
We hope it will be just a few months' time. But tell me more about how you've been coping with it, the COVID-19 back in Montana, and how life had been for both of you after going back home.
Well,
Well, it's always good to go back home. As Chinese know, particularly at Lunar New Year, the tradition of going home, we felt like we were finally coming back home. And it's been 3 years. It's been lovely to be close to our family. We built a house and we moved in just in November. And we brought our 2 cats back from Beijing, Beibei and Jingjing. And our children are just very close now, and we can drive to see them, so it's wonderful. But the virus has certainly put a damper on that because we're all practicing very safe distancing. We don't want to cause anybody to get sick, so we're trying to be very careful now.
yeah, I must say, before the virus hit, we celebrated the New Year. We got some lanterns, and we got the right kind of lanterns with a fire underneath them, and set the lanterns off of the sky to celebrate the Chinese New Year. So but that was before COVID hit. We're kind of battened down as the case with probably some of you in China. We're working very hard. I mean, our life is now telephone calls, it's Zoom calls,
Yes.
it's emails, it's all kinds of meetings. Very, very
I know,
busy.
we got devices in our hands all the time, right? Having said that,
exactly.
yes, exactly. Having said that, though, I really want to reflect back a little bit, and also with our audience as well, of the last interview almost you did when you were in Beijing before leaving China with your post as the ambassador and also in the embassy. Mel and Max, let's take a look at this.
You know, one thing I think that we'll be doing and that we really want to do is to share with every American who will listen to us what we've learned over here and how important this relationship is. We tell everybody, you should visit China and you should get to know the people. So if we can improve the relationship just by encouraging Americans to come here, students to come here, that would be a very strong wish of mine.
I like meeting people they often have different points of view. And most people who have different points of view have those views in good faith. And so...
We hope.
And most. So I like talking to people who might have an adverse view. China, they'll start to explain and ask questions and just calmly and just, it takes a little while sometimes, but just sit down and talk to people and ask questions and listen to them, listen to their concerns. And I'm quite confident, and more often than not, they'll begin to understand, oh, really, I didn't quite understand it that way. Oh, that's really interesting. I found that tends to work.
That was a sweet moment when we were sitting in the resident house when you were in Beijing. I saw Mel was, wiping tears. Really, time flies, right, Mel?
Yes, it has. I can't believe it's been 3 years.
And following up on Mel's point about more Americans who go to China, we've done some of that here. Since coming back to the United States, I set up a public policy institute at the University of Montana. Now, it's not a think tank. Rather, it encourages Montana students to get much more involved in public service. We send about 24 University of Montana law students over to China to study with Chinese law students 2 or 3 months at a time. They intermixed. I think Nanjing is one city, and maybe, I've forgotten, either Chongqing or Beijing the other. And they love it. These kids come back on fire, so we're doing all we can to get more Americans to spend more time in China and to understand China. And I must say that in any conversation, when China comes up, we always go out of our way to say, oh, no, it's wonderful in China. And Chinese people are just like American people. They have the same hopes and desires. They care about their kids, education for their kids, want to get decent income, food on the table, air, water pollution addressed. Just American Chinese people are the same.
Yeah.
And then people start to think a little more.
Earlier, Mr. Ambassador Max, you've been talking about you want to listen to people back at home if they have different opinions, even if their views about China do not match the realities you observed in China when you were ambassador. You're going to talk to them, listen to them, answer their questions. Is this still possible today, given what's been happening over the past few years?
Yes, it's very much possible one-on-one. It's very much possible in small groups. But if you're on the television and speaking to a large group and you can't see the person personally, then sometimes it gets a bit more strained, a bit more difficult. There are bloggers, very right-wing bloggers in the U.S. Who spew vitriolic bile against China, just as there are some left-wing bloggers, too, in the United States. But they're the bloggers. They're the ones on the Internet. If you can talk to people personally, one-on-one, and in smaller groups, or even larger groups, as long as you're all in the same room together before COVID, then you can make a little headway. Then you can just get people to think a little bit, even today.
One thing that Max and I have learned over the years, he was in American politics for 40 years, which is a long time. This is a presidential election year, and the dialogue always revs up and becomes difficult, and particularly this year with China. And we've seen this happen before, and it tends to wane after the election is over with. So you have to rise above the negative dialogue and just keep trying very hard to work person to person on the relationship.
But I agree with what Mel just said, but I think it's a bit more difficult today than it has been in prior years. In my judgment, I think that the chasm has widened and deepened between our two countries. One can go into lots of reasons why this has happened. But nevertheless, as Mel says, we have no choice but to try. Even though things are a bit more difficult today, we still have to try. By trying, I mean ask constructive, honest questions, make constructive, honest points. I mean, don't talk down to the Chinese, don't be obsequious and talk up to the Chinese. We're people. Chinese are people, we're people. We're all the same. And it's just how we have to get along together, because our two countries are always going to be here.
That's right.
China's not going away. China's always going to be here.
You can't wish China away. China can't wish the United States away, right? It's going to be there.
Exactly. It's going to be there.
That's right.
Exactly. So we might as well think.
There's one thing you talk about in a, shall we say, media interview with CNN, and Mr. Ambassador, you talk about whether people can still stand up and be able to speak their mind regarding what they think about China, whether people feel being intimidated. Now, what needs to be done in order to make more voices heard, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, you ask a very poignant question. In the United States, in the last couple, 3 years, it's my judgment, I think most objective observers would agree that the administration under Donald Trump has become one where the Republican Party is owned and controlled by Donald Trump. That is, moderate Republican senators, moderate Republican members of the House really cannot speak their minds very freely at all. They have to basically follow the leader, follow the president. And if they do speak up and maybe oppose some of the things he's saying, or contradict some of the things that he's saying, they'll be ostracized by the president. That means they'll lose campaign contributions. That means it'll be very, very difficult for them to get reelected. In fact, if they do so, that is speak up, speak their own minds, say what they think is right, there's a very good chance that the Republican Party, i.e. Donald Trump, will find someone else to run against them in the primary, a much more right-wing person in the primary, and that right-wing person will more likely prevail because that's the Trump base. Now, you're asking the question, how do you get these people to speak out more? And I think that they're beginning to a little bit, but not near enough. They're just hunkering down. They're waiting for the next election. Then maybe, let's hope, they'll speak out more after the next election. But it's very dangerous that they're not speaking out.
It's an election year. It's complicated. Inside the country is too much to learn for people from outside, me included, about exactly what's going on within the politics, and impossible to figure out. But on the other hand, Mr. Ambassador, how to, as you and some of the others, be able to speak out? Because this is also crucial. Once the relationship goes downward, there will be ill feelings from both sides, and that will be spilled water, hard to come back. So when you are being accused of having, quote-unquote, benefiting from your relations with China after your retirement, when you are being accused of playing an instrumental role in trying to create a permanent trade relation status with China, helping China and the United States to be in the WTO, the World Trade Organization, together and work together to promote trade, what do you make of those accusations? How do you, as someone who is so familiar with politics, be able to rise above all of these?
It's very simple. You just have to say what you think is right, and say it in a constructive way. Yeah. Say it in a way where you don't convey anger or bitterness. Don't say it in a way that's not personal. Say it in a way that rises above it, but in a way where people start to listen, because you're trying to be constructive as possible, and you're also appealing to the better lights, the better angels of people, and that tends to be a realization that, hey, we're all in this together, so it makes more sense to try to figure out a way to deal with this. It's very difficult, especially in this social media world, where with Facebook and Twitter, people are going to burrow down their rabbit holes, the liberals and Democrats down their own, more conservatives and Republicans down their own, and people tend to listen to what their friends and talk to their friends. They don't to talk to somebody else. It's very difficult, but you just have to keep at it.
Yeah, the echoing chamber, as we say. We only listen to views that we agree with, and not necessarily the diversity of views. Mel, what about from your side? I mean, you have been a very loving and caring person. You have a lot of friends here in China. You were supporting Mr. Ambassador when he was doing the bilateral relations on many important fronts. You were interacting with Chinese women. You were taking care of Chinese students, interacting with them, helping them. So what do you make of the state of relation now?
Well, clearly it's difficult with all of the dialogue that's going on. I just feel like I'm doing my part by explaining to people what our experience was when we were in China, which was very positive. I made so many dear friends that I miss a lot. We keep in touch. And I try to approach it from a human side of, we are people they are people, you have to talk to them, understand the culture before you can pass judgment, particularly if you've not been there. Sure, there can be differences of opinion between two countries, but in the end, we're all people. And I continue to carry that message. Since coming home, I also have continued to work with women and students. This year particularly, I'm engaged in supporting women who are running for public office in the United States. I think it's really important to have women's voices at the table. Yeah. Because I think the dialogue changes a bit. You talk about different issues when you have a representation of half the population there.
Yes, indeed. I know both of you are not pessimistic people. You're always optimistic, sometimes though, even cautiously optimistic. I wonder...
Maybe naive.
I wonder, what is that short list you would give me about what we can do starting from today, from your perspective, in order to make sure this important bilateral relationship, this important interaction among two great people will continue? Should we have Mr. Ambassador first, and then I'll have Mel to give a conclusion?
Okay.
Well, as Mel was speaking, I was thinking of all the very good friends I have in China today. And I correspond with them frequently. One group, I call them my Shanghai Five. We formed a WeChat group together. And we back and forth and back. And they're very astute observers of Chinese economy and society as well as American. So those are good friends. And those friendships have developed over 4, 5, 6 years. And they give me insights into what's happening in China. I ask their opinion. Oh, what about this? What about that? And they're candid, and they respond back. And so one answer to your question is just cultivate those personal friendships. For me in China and for Chinese in America. They're there, just have to work on them and cultivate that. So that's, I'll begin there, then Mel may have another point, and I'll come back with another one.
I'm sure Mel has another point.
I do. I think it's important for us to remind our elected leaders that diplomacy matters, and diplomacy is important, that we need to come to the table, agree where we can, disagree where we can't agree, but we need to have that dialogue. And it begins person to person, whether it's individually or in groups, to share the knowledge that we have about our culture and the Chinese culture, and to encourage that dialogue. That's how problems get solved.
I might say, though, at a different level, at a geopolitical level, I think part of the tension between our two countries is because at a governmental level, we just don't trust each other. The United States does not, quote, trust China. The U.S. government does not, and many members of Congress don't. And I dare say there are probably some in China who just don't trust the United States, too. So how do we deal with that? One, frankly, is for the United States to make it clear that the United States is not trying to stop China's rise. There are many in China who fear that many in the United States are trying to stop China's rise. And the more they think that, the more it's going to undermine the relationship. So the United States has to say, no, America's not going to stop China's rise. America wants China to rise. It wants to coexist with China. It wants China to rise because many new inventions and new developments will arise from rising at China. So from the U.S. perspective, we have to show we do not want to stop China's rise. From the Chinese perspective, it's important for the Chinese government to understand, I know they do, that the opacity in the Chinese government and the Communist Party causes a lot of suspicion in the U.S. Americans just don't know what the government's intentions are. What does it want to do? Does it want to control the South China Sea? Does it want to push the Seventh Fleet out? And there are a lot of basic questions. So I'm just saying that the more China opens up a little bit and shows not just says, shows it wants to work with the United States and address some of the legitimate questions the United States has, that will help.
Right. Max, I'm sure we'll have another speaker from Chinese side to interact with you on some of the important points you just mentioned. But for now, I want to thank both of you for joining us as a family with us. And it's a great friendship revisited several years after you're leaving China. Many of your friends here in China, coming from different parts of the world, miss you. And I want to send their greetings to you with this occasion as well. Thank you so much. And we will be back.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back with Mr. Ambassador and also a Chinese panelist participating, talking about the state of China-U.S. relations.
The world is changing fast, taking all our lives with it. But we can change it too, by seeking answers to problems through discussions and debates. On World Insight, I ask direct questions to real people in the know, seek genuine answers, but respect diverse perspectives. Our live global debates tackle the most critical issues head-on. World Insight with Tian Wei go beyond the headlines.
You're watching World Insight live on CGTN. We are going to still coming back to the topic of the state of China-U.S. relations after this earlier talk with Ambassador Max Baucus and also Mel Haynes. Now we are joined here by two panelists. Once again, Ambassador Max Baucus, former U.S. Ambassador to China, and Professor Yuan Peng, the president of KICR, also known as China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. And I want to start by greeting you, Professor Yuan, because you are joining our conversation anew. Let me ask you about some of the important points Ambassador made earlier about mutual respect, especially the rise of China. U.S. should respect that. But on the other hand, China should match actions with words, just like China asked the United States to do the same.
Yes, it's nice to see Ambassador Baucus again. I still remember when you served as ambassador here in Beijing, you once visited us for conference.
I did.
Very good conversation with my colleagues on U.S. and China relations. But unfortunately, today the U.S. and China relations is not as good as when you served the ambassador here in Beijing. However, the sky is much brighter and the air is much cleaner today in Beijing. So the U.S.-China relations, as Tian Wei just mentioned, what we need most is mutual respect. Unfortunately, today we lack of this. For example, the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic should be a good opportunity for us to repair the relations, to build a new trust between our two countries. Unfortunately, it's becoming now, on the contrary, becoming a potential and a conflict point. And I don't want to dig the reasons, but most important is that how can we working together to put this jointly combating the invisible enemy together the first priority, and put the other things the second or aside for a while. This is the most urgent thing that we need to do to resume the mutual respect and the mutual trust.
The common ground, Mr. Ambassador, agree?
Frankly, when I first learned about the outbreak of COVID-19 in China, in Wuhan, I thought this is a great opportunity for the United States. That is, if the United States were to, right from the very beginning, say, oh, this is terrible, we've got to do something about this. Let's do all we can to help China contain the virus in Hubei province, in Wuhan, wherever. And let's offer to send teams over to help purely, totally altruistically. No strings attached, no ulterior motive, just to help, because this is, after all, a disease. It's looking like it's going to be a pandemic, and disease doesn't care whether its host is Chinese or American or Brit or Republican or Democrat. It makes no difference. Let's together figure out a way. And that was a blown opportunity, a big missed opportunity. Now, I don't know the degree to which China would have accepted a good faith offer like that. I hope so. But knowing the Chinese government a little bit as I do, the Chinese government might have been a bit suspicious, might have been reluctant, might not want to open up, might not want to show its labs and so forth. So I just don't know. But I think that was a missed opportunity.
Mr. Yuan Peng, would you like to respond to that? Because there have been a lot of lack of trust, as both of you earlier illustrated, Mr. Yuan. Are we going to, both sides, be able to grasp this opportunity about working together on a public health issue against a pandemic?
Of course, I think it's not too late to cooperate in this time. Even if in the first stage we didn't seize the opportunity to use this pandemic as an opportunity to improve the relations, but now still not too late. Unfortunately, today is too much politicized, the pandemic, to use this as a tool to demoralize China by some of the American politicians. Now I think should put the vaccine first rather than American first. Put the people's life first rather than political affairs first. So we have lots of things can working together. For example, we can jointly research vaccines. We can jointly play leading role to help the other countries, in particular African, Latin American countries. For example, tomorrow morning, Kika and the Carter Center will have a joint conference talking about how U.S. and China cooperation in helping the most wanted countries like African countries. And the most importantly is that how can we play the jointly responsible role to recovering the world economy, or otherwise even the pandemic ended, the world economy entering the other disasters, not good news for the whole world. So I think put vaccine first, put dealing the invisible enemy first, and to put the other things to second or side. This is what we need to do, the most urgent thing.
Can we do that? This is the time, isn't it?
You make very good points. I'm sorry I take my earpiece on and off because there's so much echo otherwise when you're talking.
Yeah.
No, but to answer your question, basically three questions. Yeah, unfortunate that the coronavirus has now been a political tool. It's not only regrettable, it's disgusting because we're talking about helping people, not making this political. And I frankly think the United States has made this much more political than has China. When America even implies that maybe the virus escaped from the lab, there's a subliminal message that maybe that was intentional. Now, of course, all that is outrageous, but nevertheless, it has become more political. And unfortunately, because so many Americans at the top level, White House and Secretary of State Pompeo, have made these statements so frequently, there are some in America that wondered, gee, maybe that China did cause this in a, if not nefarious way, maybe in a neglectful way, and therefore maybe China should be punished after all. That is totally wrong. We should not punish China. It's irrelevant whether the virus originated in the wet market or whether in the lab. It certainly was not intended by China to hurt Chinese people or anybody else's people. So it's irrelevant where it came from. It did come from China, but it's irrelevant whether it's from a lab or from a wet market, although all scientists now say it's really a wet market. Now, this has happened in large part, as you know, because there are elections coming up in America, and it's much easier for President Trump to criticize China, to take blame off of him for not maybe handling it as well as he should have in America, and shift attention away from an economy that's weakening in America. But he wants to get reelected. In fact, as you probably know, a week or two ago, there was a 57-page paper written by the Republican Party saying, here's what all you Republican candidates should do till we get reelected, and basically it's criticize China over COVID and just criticize China generally.
Yeah, but Mr. Ambassador, if I could jump in here, there are a lot of things that need to be done.
Yes.
There's so many things that the two sides needs to be working together about. There is already a pandemic research science part. You talk about it. There's also the economy that is so much in danger, world economy, the U.S.-Chinese economy too. There's the trade deal, first phase, that need to be implemented and built with good faith and then move on to the next stage. There is also cultural and also educational exchanges need to take place between the two countries. We cannot wish the other side away. We said it earlier. So what can be done now? Mr. Ambassador, I have to come back to you and also ardently ask that question again, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, first we should stop the public criticism of each other.
Okay.
That's making it personal. Stop that. Just stop. Just stop that. Both sides. Both ways. You know, time out. Peace. No more public criticism. That'd be a good place to begin. Second, we can work on the phase 1 of the trade deal. Now, unfortunately, because of coronavirus, the Chinese consumers are not buying near as much as they were, nor are American consumers buying. So it'll be very difficult to implement phase 1 of that agreement. For example, I don't think China's in a position to buy $200 billion more of agriculture, manufacturing, or energy equipment. But still, the United States and China can sit down and say, well, gee, we signed this phase 1. We both pledged to implement it, but the world's changed because of coronavirus. Let's figure out in a good faith way how to modify it. That would be progress.
All right. Professor Yuan, very unfair. I only have 1 minute left for you. Please go ahead. What is your description of solutions?
Yeah, we need more voices from our American side. So Ambassador talking more, I think it's fair. So my last point is that we do have some successful story to cooperate during September 11, 2001 on countering terrorism, during 2008 jointly dealing with the financial crisis. And now it's the third test for U.S. and China to cooperate on dealing with combating the invisible enemy. So put this the first priority. And then I'm happy to see that Vice Premier Liu He not long ago has a phone call with his counterpart, Nightclubs and Russian, to promise that both sides will implement the phase 1 trade deal. So those things I think is very positive. So in the next, put the political factors aside, and the next the scientists and doctors talking about the origins of the pandemic, and the politicians and should do whatever they want to improve the relations. Otherwise, the relation is really in a very dangerous situation.
I want to thank both of you from the bottom of my heart for being very ardent, holding on to this very important relations between China and the United States and working under extreme pressure and also difficult circumstances, you and many of your colleagues and friends from China and the U.S. Ambassador Max Baucus, former U.S. Ambassador to China, Yuan Peng, President of China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Be safe. And you're watching World Insights, still to come on the program. Coronavirus cases in South Korea, the hard lessons of the reopening while managing infections right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. A new spike in confirmed cases. Infections hit South Korea. Most of the cases were traced to clubs in Seoul's one of those districts, which is called Itaewon. after a 29-year-old man who did the rounds there in early May tested positive. Health authorities said Tuesday that infections linked to the area exceeded 100 nationwide. The country has again raised its guard against a new outbreak, advising nightclubs and bars to close temporarily. So what's the latest there, and what's the hard lessons as the city reopened? I talked to Dr. Alice Hian-Kiang-Tan, an internist at Miss Medi Women's Hospital. Let's hear what she had to say. For more about that, in Seoul via Zoom, we have a Dr. Alice Hian-Kiang-Tan, internist at Miss Medi Women's Hospital. Dr. Tan, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things people have in mind about South Korea, of course, is a cluster of outbreak regarding the nightclub incidents. Tell me more about what is the latest.
So we know that the first onset of symptoms happened on May 2nd, and there have been 119 cases related to this cluster so far. We've really put out an all-out effort in terms of the public health officials, the government. Law enforcement is also involved in trying to get as many people tested as possible. We've run a total of 22,000 tests for suspected patients, and as I said, we've yielded 119 positive cases so far. There have been cases of secondary transmission already, no cases of tertiary transmission, so we know that time is of the essence, and we are really encouraging everyone who's been at one of the nightclubs in that Itaewon said area between April 24th and May 6th to come forward and get tested. It's anonymous, it's free, no questions asked, and that's the most important thing, is that people get tested so that we can rapidly isolate the positive cases.
There are a few thousand, according to some information we got from the news, as to quote-unquote the close contacts. Why there have been 22,000 cases or 22,000 tests being conducted, so everyone get many more than just one test, right?
Well, so it's this whole 2-week period between April 24th and May 6th. It's actually a whole district and a total of 9 clubs altogether. And anyone who has visited one of those clubs during that time period is considered a suspected case, that there is risk of exposure.
I see.
And so that ends up being thousands of people. It was a long weekend, and a lot of people wanted to party and have fun. Yeah. And so that's why there were so many suspected cases and so many people have come forward to get tested.
Will there be second thought, Dr. Tan, about the opening of nightclubs from now on?
So nightclubs have been shut down basically throughout the country. Seoul shut down nightclubs first, and then other cities and regions shut down nightclubs. For Seoul, it's indefinite. Other places, they said a 2-week period for shutting down nightclubs. I think going forward, what we need to do is be a little bit more pragmatic and risk adaptive in terms of analyzing which types of businesses and venues are considered high risk. You know, are we able to operate these businesses safely? In the case of a nightclub, I mean, it's practically impossible and almost worthless for the venue to be open if we have the participants do the social distancing, do the wearing of masks when they are, you know, dancing or drinking alcohol. It really doesn't make sense. And so I think going forward, we do need to be a little bit more risk adaptive in our approach.
Dr. Tan, would this mean a realignment of industries that will be existing for the next few months at least before the vaccine comes out from now on?
Well, you know, Korea is largely up and running. We were able to manage this outbreak from the beginning without a widespread lockdown. And it's only now that we're closing businesses, specifically nightlife venues. I think what needs to happen is we need to get very strict building codes that are infectious disease preventive measures. Just like we have fire safety codes and earthquake safety codes for buildings, we now have to have infectious disease prevention codes. We need to make sure that they are enforced, that somebody is going to inspect these buildings and somebody is going to train the business owners in how we can manage businesses safely in the age of COVID-19. We are trying as much as we can to avoid shutting businesses down and shutting, locking down the country. We feel that we can find a way, find a balance between operating these businesses and ensuring public health.
As you said, Dr. Tan, South Korea is well known now all over the world to do very efficient tests from the very beginning. That is your strategy and it's implemented beautifully. However, that was at a time of emergency and early outbreak. From now on, to get all the resources together all the time will be a daunting task and almost impossible. Dr. Tan, how to run the system smoothly and more efficiently, while at the same time think about sustainability? That probably is a big question facing South Korea and certainly probably later facing many other countries.
That is a very good point. We had over 600 screening centers throughout our country, and as you know, as of 2 weeks ago, we hardly had any new cases from the community, so we were wondering, when are we going to step down in terms of the aggressive testing. We do need to manage our resources now that we are in this transition phase. It's a little bit of a limbo. We do know, however, we do expect that there will be another surge in cases come fall or perhaps winter. And so we are making plans for acute respiratory disease screening centers, specific not just for COVID-19, but for all of the influenza and other infectious respiratory diseases that we expect to see in the fall and the winter. So we are trying to figure out how to best allocate our resources, how we need to best behave in this transition time. COVID-19 has not disappeared from Korea, not by any means, and we knew that. We knew that it was still in the community. We just need to know how to, going forward, balance this sort of suppressive mode that we have for community cases versus keeping the country open for business.
Dr. Alice Tan from South Korea. And that will do it for this edition of World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.